Biblical geography is an undervalued resource in Bible study. Today, we have a special guest with us who's going to show us just how important it is and why we should pay attention to it. We're going to walk through a couple specific examples, and I think it's going to be quite helpful. Stay tuned. This is the Bible Sojourner, where we discuss issues related to the Bible, theology, and culture. I'm your host, Peter Gaiman, professor of Old Testament and Biblical Languages at Shepherd's Theological Seminary. Shalom and welcome. Thanks for joining. Well, I'm really excited about today's episode. We have a special guest with us, Dr. Todd Bolen from the Masters University. And just a few things about Todd Bolen before we get going here. He has been at TMU since 1996, helped teach the Israel Bible Extension program there, the IBEX program. And during that time, he founded BiblePlaces.com, which I hope, Todd, you'll talk a little bit more about. And so he's done a lot of things with the land, with Israel, with geography. I thought Todd would be the perfect guest to come on today's episode to talk about the Bible and how geography intersect and how geography helps us understand the Bible. So without further ado, Todd, welcome to the episode. And would you please introduce yourself a little bit to us?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. It's good to be with you. And so I love the Bible and I love the land of the Bible, and the Lord just made it possible for me to live in the land of Israel. First as a student, I actually met my wife, and we were both studying there, and then to help to start this school, the extension campus of the Masters University, which it's just been, by God's grace, been thriving now for some 25 years. And now I teach on the home campus at the Masters University, so I'm just teaching general Bible classes. So, but I'm able to bring geography into the classroom. That's one of the things that I really enjoy, helping the students kind of open their eyes to the biblical world. And this is not a mythical place, but real places, real times. And I said I'm married. I have 5 children, and I serve at my church, Grace Baptist. I help to lead at one of the adult Bible fellowship groups there, and we study through the Bible. We actually just kind of go through the Old Testament one chapter a week, and for 9 years now. So that's just been a great opportunity to study and learn together. And bringing in, usually use photos and maps whenever I can to help to illustrate the text there. So I get a chance to kind of use in America now, for people who maybe haven't been to Israel, how does geography help us to better understand God's word?
That's great. And you mentioned using photos to help do that. And that's kind of one of the things that you've done with your website, BiblePlaces.com. And can you just introduce that a little bit as far as kind of what the motivation was behind that and how you use that?
Sure. I was teaching in Israel and taking photographs, and I wanted to use them in my own teaching, and other students and seminary students and so on. I was leading some summer groups with seminary students, and they're like, "Hey, we want to get some of these pictures too, so we can use them in teaching." And then digital cameras came out, good quality digital cameras came out while I was living there, and so I started taking pictures for free, and traveling as much as I could all over the place to develop photo collections. So that's what we do at Bible Places, is develop photo collections, create photo collections that illustrate the biblical world. And so we have one of our collections, we just cover the biblical lands. We are centered in Israel, but all the way west into Spain and France and the Roman world there, and all the way east over to Iran, and a lot of things in between, biblical Turkey and Greece, to whatever sites are mentioned in the Bible, to have photographs. And so for one thing, not everybody can go to these places. The other thing is, when people do go, and I was in Israel last month and traveling around, and so I've got a group of seminary students who were seeing these places, and they can take their pictures, and they do, but it's not always the best weather. Sometimes, we had a dust storm blow in, or there's just people standing in the way, or so I had just the opportunity of going to these sites again and again and again on the days of the best weather and the days when people weren't standing in the way, to get photos that could be more broadly useful. And then more recently, now it's been almost 10 years, but we started creating photo collections to illustrate the Bible book by book. And so somebody who doesn't necessarily know much about geography and know like where to jump around in the land to find the photos that they need, they can just say, well, I'm just teaching through Matthew. So now we have a photo collection just for Matthew. It's all organized by chapter, by verse. It has museum photographs along with the landscape images, historic photographs, and everything kind of brought together to make it easy to illustrate. We call it the photo companion to the Bible because it just kind of goes along and gives photos that illustrate the biblical text.
Oh, that's great. And I do want to say, I mean, I feel like you were a little modest, but some of those photographs are amazing. Like I don't know where you learned how to take pictures, but those are fantastic photos. So thanks for your work on that.
Thank you.
Now, I will also say too, I've taught through using a lot of your photos, and I've taught a class on First Corinthians. I've taught a class on Daniel using those photo companion sets. And I just want to definitely highlight their value. Extremely useful and valuable for that. So I'll put a link in the description for this episode so people can be directed to that to look more into that. But let's talk about some geographical things. So just, I guess you've kind of already touched on how the land of Israel was interesting to you and how you started getting in that. But when you're teaching students about geography, like when you're teaching your Old Testament survey classes or studies or New Testament, trying to interest students in geography, because I know some listeners or viewers are thinking to themselves, okay, I mean, the scripture is inspired. I just want to read what the Bible says. Why should I know about this valley or that valley or whatever? How do you motivate students to care?
Yeah, great question. I guess on one level, I do what I do with everything, which is if I love it, then I communicate that passion and that excitement. And so and usually I'm teaching what I love. I teach the Bible, and if there's something of less interest or whatever, then I'm maybe not going to spend much time on that. But something where I'm like, I just love this, then they're going to be immediately, their interest is piqued, and they're like, well, why does he like this? And that's going to get them for a little bit, and then I want them to see how it connects. I mean, it's always the so what question. And so I'm not just like interested in geography for geography's sake. I mean, I don't like study the hills and the valleys or, in Southern California or whatever. I mean, like it just, it doesn't really change anything for me. Whereas understanding the geography of the Bible does affect how you read the text. And I would be careful. I don't know. I'd say like you can't understand it, but there's certain dimensions or certain things that the biblical author, he just knew that was just part of his world and his audience's world. And if we don't know it, then we're going to just miss out. We're going to miss that connection. And so I'm going to be, I'm not usually just giving like, hey, Old Testament survey students, here's like an hour lecture on geography. Because especially like early in the semester, I remember actually when I had Old Testament survey, my professor did something like that, and I just kind of like, well, why do I care? Like, I mean, is this just give me facts? You're trying to give me, some information for a test or something, but rather to make a clear and close connection between here's why you need to understand this. And so I may start like in a general introduction Bible class in giving some of the basics, for example, like 4 main regions of the land. And for those who are watching the video version of this, I'll just put up a little map here to see. I'll just use this slide actually and say, hey, look at this and this and this, and here's the coastal plain, and it's short and it's simple. Like in 5 minutes, I kind of give them like, hey, there's 4 basic regions, but then I can come back on the next lecture and build on that. Say, okay, now you remember like the hill country and what's the dynamic of that, and then now here's this story, or here's a good one, the story of David and Goliath. I mean, I've showed them on already that you have the plain, the flat coastal plain of the Philistines out on the west, and then you have the Israelites living up the hill country out to the east, and where would you expect them to fight? Well, guess where David and Goliath fight. I mean, the conflict is right in the middle in a region of land known as the Shvela, these low rolling foothills. So then I draw them into that, and then I think once that clicks for them, then they can say, oh, like I wonder what other geographical details would help me to better understand the story,
Hmm.
and try and engage with them in that way.
That's super helpful. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there with engaging students through examples, showing them how it matters before just giving them data. I think that's really well done. Now, speaking of geography and the impact, which you've already been talking about for biblical characters, thinking about you already introduced kind of the four regions of the land of Israel. What are some ways that when you think about geography with Israel in particular, how does it impact the ancient Israelites, just generically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a real sense in which their lives were affected every day by the geography. I mean, they would, need water, so they would go down into the valley to the spring or the well, and then they would come back up to the hill. Probably if they live on a hilltop, a lot of times where it's more protected, and they walk through the city gate, and so that's just going to be their world. I mean, I can live a lot of my life and sitting at one desk in front of a computer without having to think about how my geography affects me. But for them, I mean, everything they do. And of course, if there's an invader on the horizon, I mean, they're thinking about where they're going to build their city in the first place. I mean, when I think about like, hey, where do I want to live? I'm thinking about where's the school, and how much is the rent or whatever. But they're thinking about uh, where are we going to be protected from the enemy? Where is there good agricultural land? I mean, all of these water sources and communication routes, trade route. I mean, all of that is just that's just part of their existence. They couldn't even imagine maybe some of our worlds where geography, almost doesn't matter in a lot of ways. When we think about, say, water sources, we can think about in the patriarchs time with Abraham and Isaac, and there's this conflict over wells. I mean, they're digging a well, and then the other guys are arguing, hey, we dug, it's our well. And that conflict over water uh, is related to geography. Or for example, even to contrast it with in the Gospels. I mean, you don't read those stories in the Gospels. Nobody's fighting over water sources or wells in the Gospel of Luke. Um, and there's maybe more than one reason, but one of them is the simple geography. So Abraham and Isaac are living in the Negev, and the Negev is dry, so there's not a lot of rain, there's not a lot of water sources, and so you're gonna have to work really hard and dig a well. And in Galilee, it's going to get double or more of the precipitation annually. So that just affects, the daily life of individuals. But then we can think as well when we're reading through the Bible, and there's place names that pop up, and we see even from the book of Genesis some of the same names. We got Shechem appearing multiple times, and Bethel, and Hebron, and Beersheba, and then as you keep on going, like into the time of Joshua and Judges and the Kings, um, you have the same cities, and then you add to it like Shiloh and Bethlehem and Mitzpah and Ramah, and why is that? Why it's the same places we keep coming back to, and the answer is the geography. And we can if you just know like, oh, there's hills in Israel, um, but that's like to say, well, there's the hill country, and it's rugged or whatever. But if you understand the land is cut up by these dry canyons. In Hebrew, they're called nahals, or in Arabic, wadis, and they're beautiful for hikers. I was with a group last month, and some of them wanted to go out hiking for a day and to go through one of these canyons in the Judean wilderness. It's really beautiful or whatever. But for the ancient person, uh, that wasn't so much the consideration. They're thinking, how do I get from point A to point B? And the hill country is all cut up by these deep canyons, which, look, you don't want to go down and back up if you don't have to. And so those who are watching this can see just a few pictures of some more extreme examples that all of the wadis are not quite this deep or such a barrier to traffic. But just in general, uh, in the hill country, you don't want to be going up and down if you don't have to. And so what you're going to do is you're going to stay along the ridges. And those cities that I mentioned before are all along a main ridge, kind of a central spine that runs down from north to south down the hill country and avoids these wadis. So you don't have to go up and down. And so what that means then is that everybody in the, not everybody, but I mean, a lot of people in the biblical account are going, back and forth between these very same cities. And you don't realize that if you don't know just kind of simple uh, geographical makeup of the land and of the hill country, and travel along the ridges. And you've got this main central ridge where you just connect the dots, and that's where so much biblical history occurs.
Oh, that's super helpful. And I think, yeah, I remember the first time I went to Israel, I was just blown away with how every biblical story, I would say almost every biblical story has something to do with geography. It's pretty incredible. I think that's you summarized that perfectly. Now, you already mentioned a few key locations with regard to Israel and why names keep being repeated. Are there others that the Bible reader would tune in and see repeated for special purposes?
Yeah, so there are, yeah, I mean, there's just, so many different sorts of things. One that comes to mind um, is a text that, the average reader would probably skip over. Um, and it's not like a Bible story. I mean, we tend to know like the Bible stories, especially those who grew up in the church. But there's a lot of significant things that aren't necessarily reduced to stories, but are significant. And so I think, for example, in the reign of Solomon, 1 Kings 9, it talks about his building activities, and it says that he built, fortified three cities: Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. And I mean, the question could be like, well, I mean, why? I mean, Solomon, you're a wise guy. Out of all of the places, why are you fortifying Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer? And if you understand the geography, then I mean, it's really a no-brainer in a way. I mean, Solomon, was very wise, but I mean, it didn't take a lot of wisdom, maybe, to identify that on the northern side, guarding your entrance into the land, uh, right astride the major highway coming from Damascus and points beyond, is the city of Hatzor. And so you're going to want to fortify that. And then guarding the route through Mount Carmel, this international highway, is the city of Megiddo. And that didn't start with Solomon. We have ancient texts from Egypt that talk about the importance of Megiddo, guarding the pass, guarding the route through. And so Solomon, he's going to want to protect that. And by the way, um, this is probably a lesser known fact, and if you're not attuned to geography, then you're not going to think about it. But two kings of Judah die at Megiddo, which, like, of Judah. I mean, it is in the divided kingdom time, and I won't get into that, but that just is a reflection of the strategic significance of Megiddo. And then Gezer is important. It's not only is it on the international highway, all three of these are, but it's guarding the western approach to Jerusalem. So anybody, like, say, Solomon dies a few years later, a pharaoh named Shishak says, hey, I think I'd like to take some of that gold that Solomon put in his temple there. He's going to invade, and guess where he's going to come? He's going to come right by Gezer. And so Solomon was wise to fortify these places. Of course, we can also see in that lesson as well that it's not enough to be wise and to fortify a city if your trust is not in the Lord. And with Rehoboam, his son, was disobedient, God says, look, that fortified site's not going to be enough to protect you from my righteous judgment.
That's really helpful. And I think really important to recognize the significance of some of these key cities, not just for defense, but like you said, for water. But one specific question I would have too would be with regard to religious significance, or maybe some sort of symbolic significance. So obviously defense makes sense, but do we get do we get the indication in the biblical narratives that there are places that have religious significance? Obviously, Jerusalem might be thrown in there, but Jerusalem and maybe any others come to mind?
Yeah. Maybe not a lot. I mean, Jerusalem, that'd be kind of a main one. I think of Mount Zion, but also another mountain, Mount Carmel,
Hmm.
which, that's an interesting place because you don't have much activity in the Bible on Mount Carmel. You don't have people living there. I mean, it is, allotted out to the tribes or whatever, but it seems to have been then, just like it is today, a uh, a, a place that's covered with forests and just hard to inhabit. One big Bible story that we do have, of course, and this relates to the question of this religious significance, is with Elijah in meeting the prophets of Baal, and we know the traditional location where this occurred. I mean, can't prove that that's the place, but it makes good sense that it was up on this summit called Mukraka, where Elijah gathered these prophets of Baal. And what's not in the story, so there's a whole lot, of course, in First Kings 18 that you can draw out. But what's not there is what everybody knew, which is that Mount Carmel, sitting as it does, right next to the Mediterranean Sea, getting the storms coming off of the ocean, elevated about 1,800 feet at the highest point, and also more to the north. It's just going to get more rainfall, and so it's going to be symbolic of fertility. And also and this is something you can see this if you look on a map, but the beginning reader may not pick this up, but it is in between the heartland of Israel, like Samaria, tribes of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Phoenicia. So Jezebel, of course, is from Phoenicia. Well, the Phoenicians had some kind of presence, and it seems to maybe vary over time, but some sort of presence and desire for Mount Carmel. And so maybe, I don't know if this is too much to say. I don't think it is, that in a way Mount Carmel was kind of home turf for Baal. I mean, he was the supposed god of rain, the storm. He had a lightning bolt in his fist, and Elijah doesn't say, well, let's meet down, in the wilderness or whatever. But it's like, no, this is where you really shine. If you can like do anything, you can certainly do this. We're going to make it easy on you or whatever. But of course, I mean, Baal is nobody. That's what the story demonstrates, that they're even on Mount Carmel, where you would expect to get the most amount of rain or whatever. Baal can't bring rain for 3 years, and he can't even bring a lightning bolt to light the fire because he's a fraud.
Yeah, that's helpful to. And again, I think when you're just sitting there on the mountain, you can definitely see that, especially with just the beautiful lush regions there that are on full display there. Now, when you think about, obviously you've done a lot of study there. You lived, how many years did you live in Israel?
About 12 years.
Okay. Yeah. So you were there for a good 12 years studying, looking, interacting with even a lot of the archaeologists who were excavating a lot of these sites. And I guess you would be kind of attuned to some of these difficulties when an archaeologist is trying to identify a biblical site and they're trying to determine, hey, is this the city of Ai? Is this Hatzor? Whatever. How, what are the current challenges, or what are some of those places that they think they might know, but they're not sure? And how are they kind of working through that these days?
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, even the question is like, how do we even come up with a map of the Bible? And then now, years after, some couple centuries even of work on this, like what are remaining uh, challenges or conflicts or debates or whatever. Yeah, there's a lot to think about there because the maps, in the back of the Bible are not inspired, so they're added by an editor, and how do we know? How can we make a map? And so, kind of the starting point for that, the easy starting point is you look around at sites that have been continuously inhabited. So Jerusalem, there's always been people living in Jerusalem. Nobody's ever wondered like, where is Jerusalem? But and then even like Joppa, today's Jaffa, just continuously inhabited. This poured out on the Mediterranean. Tiberias has always been inhabited. Hebron's always been inhabited. Um, but then, like, what about the places that haven't been? So the there's a thing that's super helpful in that regard is that site names are often preserved, and so really the main work on this was done in 1838. Edward Robinson, Eli Smith. Robinson was an American and a professor, seminary professor, and he just came over to the land of Palestine and just intent on learning what are the names of the places and seeing like, hey, do any of these connect with the Bible? And in fact, a lot of them did. I mean, dozens and dozens of he could make a map just from asking them, like, what's the name of this place? And so, for example, um, Ein Shems is the spring of the sun. Well, that's in the same general region as Bet Shemesh, house of the sun, and the Arab village of Ascar preserves the name of Sychar. The woman at the well was from Sychar, and Sebastia, the Arab village there, preserves the Herodian city of Sebasti, which was the Old Testament capital of Israel's kingdom, Samaria. Nain in the Jezreel Valley is still called Nain today, and Ein Gedi in Arabic is Ein Gedi, and so that was a lot of work was just accomplished pretty fast. And then since then it's like, okay, let's fill in the blanks and let's find the sites that we're not sure about, and so that's just been a lot of work and scholarly discussion, debate for quite some time. And I think of one mistake that was made. I mean, of course, lots of mistakes are made, and it's no big deal or whatever. You just say, hey, but one curious one, they identified the site of Tel Arene. This was Albright, William F. Albright, who said, Tel Arene, that is the Philistine city of Gath. Now, Albright's very respected, and he did a lot of fantastic work. And when the Israelis founded a city next door to the Tel, they said, oh, we're going to call our city the village of Gath, Kiryat Gat. So it's still there today. But scholars have since then realized, you know what, Gath was not this far south. It's actually another site about a dozen miles to the north, what was known as Tel Es-Safi. So places do kind of get moved around as scholars do more study and kind of figure out. There are some that there's still not agreement on. There's still kind of competing voices or scholarly discussion articles being written or whatever. A few I think about, like Sha'araim, which is a minor city, but they discovered this really interesting site in the Elah Valley, right near where David fought Goliath. And the archaeologist says, this is Sha'araim. And some people who are more attuned to geographical understanding say, that can't be Sha'araim because the Bible puts it close by, but not there. Ziklag, that's another one. I think it's the same archaeologist who actually made that mistake, if I remember right. I think he dug a site. It's like, hey, this is a great site. Let's call it, Ziklag in the Bible, whatever, and people will care about it. Well, the problem is that's not where Ziklag was. And so how do we know? How do you like try to, how can I even say like he's wrong or whatever? What is my evidence or support? Big part of it is looking at the geographical details in the text. Usually the Bible. I mean, that's kind of a starting point. Not only the Bible. Sometimes we have other sources like the church father Eusebius. He wrote a really nice list of sites and where they're located. Now, it's not perfect. It's about, written about the year AD 330 or so. So, he might have got some things wrong. So it's not, yeah. So geographers have to do work in order to, it's not just like, well, this guy says it, so it must be right, but look at this evidence, look at that evidence, and then the archaeology to come along to confirm it. A big debate. Now, is this a big debate? I mean, in some circles it is. Where is Sodom? So there's one archaeologist in the evangelical circles who he says this is Sodom, and he's been excavating there for a number of years, and they've done a lot of great work, but the geographical details don't fit. I mean, he keeps saying that they do, but when you look at the text more carefully, and all the texts. I mean, there's a lot of texts that are relevant, not just one verse, but a number of different things indicate that Sodom is not on the northern side of the Dead Sea, but on more towards the southern end. And then I think too, and I was just had a chance to revisit this place. I haven't been there maybe only a couple times in my life. Uh, Relate that's possibly Bethsaida, and this is kind of a curious little thing, and I don't think I said this to my students, but it's kind of I'll mention it now. Curious thing to me that two of the kind of big debates are related to sites named Et Tel, and so you've got an Et Tel uh, in near Jerusalem, 10, 12 miles north of Jerusalem. That some scholars say this is Ai that's conquered by Joshua. And then there's another site with the same name, Et Tel, up on the northern side of the Sea of Galilee, and the archaeologist saying this is Bethsaida, and and I, there's another site. Other archaeologists are digging the last 5 years or so near Et Tel in the north that has some better evidence that that is Bethsaida. So that Et Tel might not actually be what all the road signs say, and then the one down in the area of Benjamin, Ai, that may not be at the Et Tel that some scholars have said. So there's still a lot of work for geographers to do. There's still a lot of room for healthy debate and writing articles and thinking more deeply and more carefully. And some people, let's just make sure we got this in here too. Some people bring to the debate a presupposition that the Bible is accurate. And so some people, that's a negotiable. And so if the details don't fit what they want it to be, then we can kind of fudge on what the Bible says. And but for those who say no, the Bible's going to be right, and we have to trust it, then we're going to move forward maybe in some different ways than others.
Oh, that's a really good description, and I would just reiterate exactly what you said with regard to the connection between geography and archaeology. Just I think it's so helpful in so many ways. The archaeologist's best friend is the Bible, just given that description of where these things took place. And I think it's also important too, because I know some people might be wondering, well, is my faith in jeopardy if we don't know exactly where this place was? And I would say, not at all. I mean, we know it is there somewhere, and it might not be under this hill. It might be over under that hill, and we can hopefully figure that out sometime.
That's right. That's right.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about some specifics, because I think that's what's just really enjoyable for people. And I know you've done a lot of work on various geographical issues. And so I guess I'd throw it out there, maybe some examples that people aren't familiar with. Are there any misunderstood geographical references, or maybe lesser known examples that you find significant or interesting that maybe people haven't thought about before?
Yes. Yeah. So there's a lot of fascinating discussions, and I had a chance to participate in a project that our readers might find interesting if they haven't already uh, been made aware of the Lexham Geographic Commentary, edited by Barry Beitzel, published by Lexham Press, associated with Logos Faith Life. And so they have a series. It's going to be 6 volumes in total. 2 are out. 2.5 are out. So the third one just came out in digital form, but they have the 2 volumes for the New Testament, and then now a Pentateuch one. The print volume will be out soon for Pentateuch, and then they're going to do the rest of the Old Testament. And so when I was approached, I said, "Hey, would you like to contribute to this volume of dealing, geographic commentary? So like, what are the issues? What do we need to know from geography that's going to better help us to understand the Bible?" And so in the course of some years working on different articles for that, there's certain issues that maybe would be of interest to our listeners. So one example is the location of Nob. Now that's not a maybe as well known of a site. Probably the more informed Bible reader would go to the story, very tragic story in the time of Saul when the tabernacles there, David had come through and received some assistance from the priests there at Nob, and then Saul came back later and ordered their deaths. But the location of Nob has eluded geographers for 100 years, but I think I know where it is. And I mean that's kind of and I'm not doing anything too original, but I'm just maybe put together a couple pieces that hadn't been um, nailed down before, and it's not too complex. I'm going to make it here simple. There's a lot of potential sites that have been identified as Nob, all in a very close region. If our listeners have the access to the video here, the sites in yellow on the slide, there's about 7, 8 of them or so, all on the northern or northeastern side of Jerusalem that have been suggested. Hey, this is Nob, or this is Nob, or this is Nob, um, and here's an older photograph that shows the same region, different little perspective there, and the sites in white are potential sites for Nob. And in a sense, you could say like, well, who cares or whatever. The event happened, yes, and does it matter if we know where it happened? But there's other references to Nob in the Bible as well, and so and again, too, it's not so satisfying for someone making a map to say, to put a question mark, like Nob question mark. I mean, like, can we figure this out? I mean, and always too, we honor the Lord by working hard and with excellence. And so what do we know? And I believe, and just kind of cut to the answer, as it were, those people who have been to Jerusalem and seen the Mount of Olives with the 3 towers on it. I believe that Nob is located at the location of the middle tower, what is the Augusta Victoria. And there's a closer view of that where, and we're not sure, I'm not sure, exactly where, like I can't like say it's like this piece of ground, but within a few hundred yards. And how can I say that? What I, kind of develop in this article, it's in a forthcoming volume on the historical books for that Lexham series. But 3 things make it clear, and looking at different passages. One is we know that Nob has a view of Jerusalem. So that makes sense on the ridge of the Mount of Olives. It doesn't make sense like some of the sites put it on the back side of the Mount of Olives. You don't have a view, so we should disqualify that immediately. We have a text, and this is one of those texts that you skip over. It's a list of names in Nehemiah 11, but it puts Nob in between Anatoth, that's known as Jeremiah's hometown, and Ananiah. Well, okay, if we know where Anatoth and Ananiah are, then Nob needs to be in between those, and this place here on the Mount of Olives fits that bill. And then here's the thing that just locked it down for me, like the missing piece of the puzzle where I'm like, you know what, this has got to be where it is. When David is fleeing from Absalom, he's going over the Mount of Olives, barefoot and weeping, it says. And then it says that when he arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, bing. I mean, bingo. I mean, that's I mean, that's not talking about a pagan high place. They wouldn't say like they used to worship God, the true God, at the pagan high place. I mean, no, it's so it's got to be on the summit where the road crosses over on the way to Jericho, and that's where the Augusta Victoria is today. I give you another example. If I can go outside the land of Israel, and I haven't, so maybe that's just even like just kind of a note here. Like there's a lot of geography outside of Israel that's super interesting and helpful. And I mean, that could be like a whole nother conversation. My, knowledge, because of where I lived, is more, focused on the land of Israel. But let me jump out to the city of Susa for another example in the book of Esther, and just got a few those who are listening who can see. I got a map here that shows the geographical significance of Susa within the Persian Empire. So we could talk about that. It's one of the capitals, not the only capital, but it's the winter capital because it gets super hot in the summer. I mean, things like that kind of help you to better understand the story there with Esther and then her husband uh, Ahasuerus, Xerxes, and then we could talk about the geography of the city itself. And this is just a little plan that one of my uh, friends made, who teams up with me on this photo companion to the Bible project, and he just made this nice diagram where you can see the basic layout of Susa and where the palace is relative to the Acropolis and relative to the royal city. And I had a unique opportunity just to be able to visit. It's in Western Iran, and so not a lot of travelers are making their way. But the French excavated for 100 years this site of Susa, and you can see the geography of the site from what they dug. We've talked about geography kind of on a larger level. We can talk about the geography of a city and the geography of Susa, and where was the king Xerxes staying, and where was the queen Hadassah Esther staying, and where's the courtyard where Haman was when he was waiting out there, and that's the king's sleepless night, and we actually know you can see the palace architecture, the location of the king's chambers, and his throne room. They've are excavated and put in the museum there, and some this is also the museum in Paris at the Louvre. So either place in Susa, Tehran, and Louvre, you can see beautiful reliefs that Esther would have seen and Mordecai would have walked by. And Mordecai, we know he overheard the conspiracy in the King's Gate. Well, they found the King's Gate, and I mean it's large, and there's a lot of areas. You can imagine a couple of these scoundrels, off conspiring in the corner, and by God's providence, Mordecai is able to overhear their conversation, report it, and of course, then in God's providence, Mordecai is not rewarded until the opportune time. I mean, just and all these little details there, but it just look, you can understand the story of Esther without knowing the geography, but it increases appreciation and understanding, I think, to be able to see the details here, and so we can map out where the inner court was when Esther was approaching the king, and she's wondering. They've been praying, right? Is the king going to hold out his scepter? And this is I have a picture here of the throne room where Esther just walks right up to just to see the king and to make the request because her people are in jeopardy. And this is where the king Xerxes sat on his throne. And we even have a relief. This isn't geography exactly, but I mean, in geography is so helped by archaeology, and they discovered in another Persian capital, the city of Persepolis, this relief. I mean, it's just marvelously preserved, shows the king sitting on his throne. Now, this is Xerxes' father, we believe, sitting on the throne, but behind him, that's the crown prince. That's Esther's, her husband. And so to have like a picture of him. Let me give you another example. Jumping now to the New Testament and the story in Acts 12, not a children's story, the story of the death of Herod Agrippa the first. The Bible tells us where, kind of. It says it's in Caesarea, but Josephus, the first century historian, gives us a parallel account, and he says that Agrippa was in the theater when the people hailed him as a god. You're a god, you're God. And he did not acknowledge that. And so the Lord struck him down and he died. But I think, and so I wrote an article about this in the Gospels volume of the Lexham Geographic Commentary. Josephus says that it occurred in the theater. And I say, no, I think it actually occurred in the hippodrome. So picture here showing those two buildings. They're close together. But why do I think Josephus got the location wrong? Well, he says it's early in the morning. Again, this is not in the Bible, but he says it's early in the morning, and the sun illuminated him. That all the people see this, and that's in the Bible, Book of Acts too. That they're just struck by his brilliance. And the problem is the theater faces west, and the sun isn't going to come over. There's lots of seats that rise up. How many rows of seats 30 or 40 seats, rows of seats or whatever, the sun's not going to be rising early in the morning to illuminate the king, unlike in the hippodrome where there's only 12 rows of seats. And so the king, it's going to be early in the morning. And also the festival that this occurred at a festival, Josephus tells us, and we don't know exactly which one. There's two good possibilities, either celebrating the founding of Caesarea or the Emperor Claudius's birthday. But both of those are celebrated with the games. Well, where do they hold the games? Not in the theater. They hold them in the hippodrome. So um, that's just a little bit kind of bringing in some extra biblical sources. And again, the Bible, Luke's purpose, what is Luke's purpose in Acts 12? It's not maybe to entertain us with details or whatever, but to show that this king, this Jewish king, who had just murdered the apostle James and was on his way to murder the apostle Peter, actually God's sovereign over that. And God delivers Peter, but he executes this king who accepts glory to the Lord. And so it just brings more light, more more understanding to just the marvelous way that God worked. And the way it says there in Acts, I mean, Luke just notes the word of the Lord continued to spread, not only through miracles of healing, but also even through judgment upon the church's enemies. So I can give you another example from the Gospels. Now, this one's a little more kind of in the weeds, but some listeners may their ears may perk up because they've read over the years when they're reading in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because there's this story of a man who's demon possessed being delivered by the Lord Jesus, and the legion of demons cast into the pigs and run off into the water. The problem, though, there's actually a textual problem. When you read it in Matthew, it says that Jesus came to the region of the Gaderenes, so Gadara, and in Mark and Luke, it says it's in the region of the Gerasenes. But actually, it's not even that simple, because there's footnotes in your Bible, or even some translations that have another word, Gergesenes. You're like, man, confuse me with all these words that start with G. Like, where did the miracle occur? And so there's a really helpful case where geography can actually confuse the text. In fact, an early church father, Origen, said, hey, I know the geography. The Bible's wrong. And he changed, I mean, I believe this a little bit, connecting some dots here, but it seems that he actually, we actually have his commentary where he says, right, it can't be what the Gospels say. It must be the region of the Gergesenes, and created a problem that lasted for some centuries before scholars kind of worked it out. And I should even say, scholars haven't fully worked this out because they're still debating. And so I wrote this article about this particular issue with a lot of detail. It's a longer article than most of them are in the commentary, but I just really was appreciative to have the opportunity to try to look at all the textual evidence. So what do the original manuscripts of Matthew, Mark, and Luke say? And look at the geographical evidence. What about the steep slope? Because, where do the tour guides stop today? They stop at a steep slope that's more north on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And I say, well, that's a steep slope, but does it match the manuscript evidence? Does it match? And they say, you know what? You can't be right. I mean, the biblical manuscript, when Matthew says the region of the Gadarenes, cannot be right, because Gadara is 6 miles from the shore. Here's a photo of standing at Gadara, and that's the Sea of Galilee. It is, 6 miles away. But here's this. This is so helpful. When archaeologists were studying the water level of Sea of Galilee, it's the level varies. When years of drought, it can go down. And they discovered, hey, there's a harbor for Gadara. And not only that, they discovered coins from Gadara that depict boats. So what do? You have a city that's 6 miles away, but it has they're featuring boats. So they had their own harbor. All right, so now bring this to the Bible. Matthew says that Jesus was in the region. He doesn't say it was in the city of Gadara. That would have been wrong. I mean, there's no, the lake's not, but the region of the Gaderenes. And there is a steep slope, and not many people talk about this or know this or whatever, because probably a few reasons. One is a lot of tour groups don't stay that long in those lands, so there's like they're gonna like cover. We go to Capernaum and we go to Magdala, and then let's go to Jerusalem, whatever. But if you have more time, you spend more time, you can actually investigate this a little bit more. And here's the point I would just make is that when you look at the archaeology and the geography and the textual evidence, it all comes together and fits to confirm what Matthew and Mark said. Now, I didn't quite answer. Maybe I'll just throw in one last little thing on this. The Matthew and Mark do have different locations, but does that mean they're contradicting? And the answer there is Gadara is a smaller place that Matthew uses for a readership that's more local. Matthew's writing to Jewish people more familiar with the land of Israel. Mark and Luke, by contrast, have audiences that are much, more spread out through the Roman Empire. And they would have known the city of Gerasa, the region of the Gerasenes, like, oh, ding, ding, ding. Like, yeah, that's one of those Decapolis cities. We heard about that. And yeah, that's why the pigs are there grazing, because it's not Jewish area. It's part of this Gentile region of the Decapolis. And so that's, I think, a pretty simple way of explaining what the biblical writers meant, why they gave the region, why they give different regions, and it fits. And we don't need to do like Origen did and say, well, I found a steep slope somewhere else. We need to change the biblical text.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think just emphasizing the fact that, like you just mentioned, with how even Matthew and Mark described the story that way, how the details they use coincide with how they're trying to be helpful to their audience. I think you've convinced me, if it means anything. So
That's good.
And I remember taking my first Old Testament studies class and just being really blown away with how with this connection of geography to the narratives. And as you pointed out, it absolutely applies to the New Testament as well. But I just remember really being impressed by the fact that I think, especially growing up in America, we just think, and I know other people are listening from around the world, but in the Western world especially, we tend to over spiritualize things, and we just focus on the emotion of reading something, and there's a place for that. But I think, as you've helpfully pointed out, there's real fact and history behind these narratives, and the theology can't be divorced from the actual history.
That's right. Our theology, our application is going to be accurate to the point that our understanding of the text, the history, geography, is accurate.
Well, maybe as we're transitioning here to the end, I want to respect your time, but I know obviously we've talked a little bit about the past, but I know if somebody visits Israel today, they're going to see some interesting phenomenon that are related to geography as well. So maybe could you just describe for us, if you go to Jerusalem today, how you're going to see modern geography playing a role in understanding tourism and pilgrimage, like all this kind of existence of Israel, Arab population?
Yeah. So, one thing that comes to mind, and I don't know that I've really thought about this so much, but it just struck me recently that the route that tourists take today, most tour groups, not a student group, but the standard church tour, they follow the same geography, the same routes that they followed in antiquity. I mean, I don't know why they didn't click with me before, but they land near the ancient port of Joppa. Today it's the airport of Tel Aviv. That's a bit inland, but and then they just are zipping up the international highway, and they're going through the Sharon Plain, and they're going through Mount Carmel and by Megiddo, and they're going through the Jezreel Valley, and they go up and they're going to spend a night at the Sea of Galilee. I mean, they're just following the so-called Via Maris. I mean, a better name, I think, is the international highway. But And then, see a few sites in the Sea of Galilee, and then it's going to be down the Jordan Rift, just like Jesus and other travelers, especially in the New Testament time when they're avoiding the hill country with the Samaritans. And they're going to zip down the Jordan Rift and turn at Jericho, just like we do today, and come up the Sint-Avadimim, just following the ancient routes, and then to Jerusalem. And that's uh, uh, interesting. One kind of sad part of that, and it's probably, I don't think bring up sad things too much or whatever, but I mean, there's just a reality is that maybe the most important road of all, tourists don't go on. And that's a road I alluded to earlier today. I don't know that I gave it a name, but the Road of the Patriarchs is just a modern name we use in teaching students because it connects the cities of the patriarchs. So tourists are not going from Jerusalem up to Shechem, like who did that in the Bible? I had asked this on a quiz once and learned my lesson. You cannot ask the question on the quiz, who traveled from Jerusalem to Shechem on the Road of the Patriarchs? Because the answer is everybody. I mean, there's not a wrong answer. I mean, almost. It's from Abraham to Jacob to Joseph to David, all Jesus. I'm everybody. And then if you go south from Jerusalem down Bethlehem, now tourists will usually go to Bethlehem, but not to Hebron or Beersheba, and and that ties into another dynamic, which is um, interesting, and I don't know if this would be obvious. Maybe so. So it's worth observing. So even those who maybe have observed this before may benefit from uh, noting how we have something of a reversal of settlement pattern today from the biblical time. And by that I mean this, that where the patriarchs traveled and then later the Israelites settled was primarily in the hill country and not on the coastal plain. Who was living out on the coastal plain? It was the Philistines, and the Sharon plain was not easy to inhabit because of the terrain and the swamps and forestation and all that. So the Israelites, they're pretty much, sticking up in the hills and not down on the coastal plain. Today, the Israelis, the major Israeli cities, not counting Jerusalem, but Haifa and Tel Aviv and Ashkelon, Ashdod. These are cities that were inhabited in biblical times by the enemy, by others, and yet the historic biblical land, the hill country, this the hill country of Judah and Ephraim and Manasseh, that was the primary locations of so many biblical stories, uh, are inhabited largely by a Palestinian Arab population. So, for example, the city of Shechem is today the Arab city of Nablus. There's no Jews who live there. The city of Hebron, there's a small amount of Jews who live there. It's mostly Palestinian Arab. Or the city of Bethel. Now, there's a little difficulty where Bethel's located, but it's in the area of Ramallah. That's a major Palestinian Arab city. Now, you have a Jewish settlement at Shiloh. So that's a place where Jewish people have kind of come back. And then there's other settlements, but just the general um, characteristic, and let me even tie this into prophecy here if I can do that, but just general characteristic that the Israelis today are not living where their ancestors lived. And then if we ask the question of, so has prophecy been fulfilled? When Israel returned to the land, and a lot of people, make 1948 such a big date, certainly a amazing thing with the birth of the state of Israel. But when you look at scriptures that talk about the Israelites living back in the land and at peace and prosperous, and a lot of prophecies we could pull out here, and there's more to be done. Let's just say, right? We're definitely awaiting. There's not peace because we're awaiting the Prince of Peace. There's not blessing and prosperity because the people are sadly like the people of biblical times, which was generally hard hearts and not sensitive to the word of the Lord and the Spirit of the Lord. And So that's one thing too that maybe the tour guide won't bring up, but that is of valuable to consider is God is at work. He's working providentially. His plan is right on track, but it's not being realized. We are not in the already. We're not in the kingdom. We are awaiting the King to return and to establish the righteous rule of the kingdom of God in his land, fulfilling, and let me just add this here too. I mean, I believe that the geographical details of the text in the past are accurate, and I believe that the geographical details for texts yet to be fulfilled are also accurate and to be fulfilled literally. So that's something that maybe we don't think about as much, but I think is a valuable application of this study.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that that's one of the big takeaways when you visit Israel. I always really just appreciate just sitting on Mount Olives even and just thinking about the future. I think that's one of the best places to do that. And yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. Well, as we wrap up, let's say somebody really enjoyed today's episode and they want to study geography further. What should they do?
Yeah, so a good starting point. I can think of two map um, works projects that are really a good way to interactively connect. And one of them is the Satellite Bible Atlas, which I was just using with my students in Israel. Just a great source that has full color satellite images explained by text, and you could just read through that straight through, looking at the maps. If you want to do more marking, an organization known as Biblical Backgrounds, led by James Monson and Stephen Lancaster, they do fantastic work with creating maps and marking instructions. So you can order the set from them and then just start highlighting, drawing arrows, and that's really going to help you engage and better understand the geography. If you want to do more reading, uh, than that, there's a newer work out by Paul Wright. Paul Wright was the president for 20 years of the Jerusalem University College, which is an excellent grad school for this sort of study. If you want to do more studies, then that's that'd be first on my list to check into. And he distilled, I mean, years and years of living in Israel and guiding students around a book called The Illustrated Guide to Biblical Geography. And that's a bigger work. So that's just gonna teach you a lot. You're gonna go deep with that, but time well spent. And then if you really want to go even beyond that, more historical geography, and this is really for the experts, kind of covering from beginner to the top. That'd be The Sacred Bridge by Anson Rainey and Stephen Notley. And then the Lexham Geographic Commentary series. So if you just want to kind of dive in on like specific issues, and the nice thing is you have maybe 30, 40 chapters per volume, and you can say, hey, I really care about this one and not that one or whatever, and just kind of what grabs your interest. Those are written at a layman level largely, so that anybody, any serious, Bible reader can appreciate new geographical dimensions from dozens of experts in the field.
Yeah, I think those resources are super helpful. Thanks for mentioning those. Although I would have to say you gotta throw in your work as well with the Pictorial Library of Bible Lands and the Photo Companion to the Bible. Those are top notch, and I know especially when you give the PowerPoints and have some notes along with that, those are super helpful. You summarize and distill a lot of that data, and so I just want to really commend that as well. That's super helpful for people.
Thank you. Yeah, photos really do. I mean, if a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, the Pictorial Library of Bible Lands, for example, if you say, I just want to like look around Capernaum. So you got 60, 70 photos or something, just walking around the site of Capernaum, or you could do the city of Dan, where the Jeroboam's high place, which that would have been a good one to talk about today. A lot of interesting things with that. Or if you want to, Jerusalem, I mean, the Mount of Olives you mentioned, whatever, a lot of photos of all these different places. Try to be as thorough and comprehensive. And then with notes. So the notes I've developed over the years for teaching are all just kind of embedded in that collection so that you can just read like what's important here, why does it matter? And then the photo companion, that's just if you're just like doing a study through a biblical book. We finished the New Testament last year, and that was super exciting to all the way, through Revelation to illustrate. And a lot of times we got 100 photos per chapter. I mean, sometimes even more to just illustrate the biblical text. And then now we've got some of the books in the Old Testament done as well. So some of the really great, fun books with stories like Samuel, Kings, Esther are just well illustrated. And so that's just another kind of tool that teachers and students alike can use to enhance their understanding and to share it with others.
Yeah, and for those who have watched it, and if you are listening, you can just jump onto the YouTube and look at it for visual purposes. But some of the slides you actually showed were directly out of that companion. I noticed from Esther and whatnot. So that's a good example of what that might look like. Well, I think our time is pretty well spent, but I know this is going to be really helpful for everybody. So Todd, I just want to say thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Peter. It's been a real joy.
Well, a special thanks to Todd Bolen for joining us on today's episode. Really appreciate his work. He's been doing great stuff for years now. I really encourage you to check out his website, BiblePlaces.com. You can find out more about the pictorial library of the Bible lands. You can also find out his new photo companion to the Bible. All of those are great resources. Definitely want to check those out. I've put the link in the description below. And you can also check out my website, petergaming.com, if you want more information about me, the blog, the podcast, some of the articles I've written there. You can also visit shepherds.edu if you want more information on Shepherds Theological Seminary, where I teach. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine upon you.